The human lifespan can be divided in several ways. In this section of my introduction to developmental psychology, I briefly discuss development in each of the main stages of life: the prenatal stage and infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and even death. This first video covers prenatal development and infancy. But first, I have to say something about the stages of life in general. My name is Jouni Vilkka, and this is my channel TFF, Teacher from Finland. Please subscribe and click the thumbs up button. Previously in this series, I have discussed some general concepts in developmental psychology and then aspects of psychologically relevant development thematically, one area of development, such as physical, cognitive or emotional development, at a time. Now I will go over the stages of human life, giving an overview of each stage at a time. A person's lifespan, also called life course, can be divided in several ways, but I will keep things pretty simple and use only 4 main stages. The first begins in conception, in the sense that DNA combines and the organism begins to develop. This is of interest to psychology because genes and the expression of genes, as well as the environment in the womb, have a lot of influence on how later development occurs. Since here we are not interested in the many miscarriages that occur, I will continue to describe how after the birth a baby develops through infancy. In the second stage, the infant turns into a proper child. The child plays with toys, goes to school, and begins to become a real person. The reasoning abilities of a child are still limited, but important developments occur. This stage ends when adolescence begins. Adolescence, almost synonymous with teenage, is the third stage described here. It is the transition between childhood and adulthood, and a very important stage of development in many ways. It is also the age of most students of developmental psychology, because it is when they go to senior high school, or lukio in Finland. And so this stage may be of most interest to most people interested in the subject. I suspect that most of my potential audience is a bit older though. That is partly why I break away from the current curriculum in Finnish high schools and follow the earlier one and the one used at university level. That is, the current curriculum in Finland is focused on development from early childhood to adulthood, leaving out a major part of life. I will not. Instead, I will also cover late adulthood and even death as the last stages of development. Genetic and environmental factors influence our development already before our birth. Genetic defects, for example, can result in serious developmental disorders. The circumstances of life of the parents, especially the pregnant mother, can also influence development, especially in a negative way. Teratogen is any environmental factor, not genetic, that causes damage to the embryo or fetus. For example, alcohol consumption by the mother during pregnancy can result in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, or FASD. This means birth defects that will affect the child throughout their life. In other cases, mothers may have to take medication, even though it comes with a risk to the pregnancy, because the risks of not taking the medication are even worse. For example, anti-seizure medication, treatments of heart conditions or diabetes, and some psychiatric drugs can be necessary for the mother, and not taking them might result in worse problems for a developing fetus than taking them. The risks have to be assessed. Of course, I would prefer more people to choose not to go through pregnancy at all and rather adopt if they really want a child. Human pregnancy is usually divided into trimesters, periods of about 3 months, of which there are 3. All going well, the last trimester will end in the birth of a baby. Because a trimester is a pretty long period, it is often more useful to use weeks of pregnancy when talking about the development of the zygote, embryo, or fetus. The exact time of conception is difficult to tell, so instead of that, these weeks are counted from the last menstrual periods. The zygote attaches to the womb in the 3rd week of pregnancy, ending the germinal stage and beginning the embryonic stage. The form of life is now called an embryo after all. It is still far from being a baby at this point. The neural tube, formed of early neurons, closes up and begins to develop into the basic structures of the brain and spinal cord. After week 8, the term fetus is used. A fetus requires the mother and is not generally viable alone. While the foundational structures of the organ system have been formed during the embryonic stage, much remains to develop. The number of new neurons formed between the 10th and 18th weeks is huge. The process is called neuronal proliferation. In the next few weeks, the new neurons, or actually merely the cell bodies, travel to the permanent locations in the brain where they will stay for the rest of their existence, forming connections called synapses with other neurons. More about neuronal structures in my previous course, Introduction to Psychology. See the link in the description below. After 24 weeks of pregnancy, near the end of the 2nd trimester, the fetus still has only a 50% chance of survival in case of premature birth. There are normally about 40 weeks in a pregnancy, and a birth before or during week 37 is considered preterm. If the length of the pregnancy is not known, birth weight under about 2.5 kilograms or 5.5 pounds is another criterion for a preemie, at least in Finland and the USA. The deep structures of the brain of the fetus develop so that they should be finished after full-term pregnancy and ready to take care of basic functions of life like breathing, circulating blood, and controlling digestion and the sleep cycle. This does not mean an end to the development of the brain, of course. There are important developments to come in early childhood, and brain development doesn't really ever end. The fetus also begins to sense and learn from experience already after about week 13. They start using their eyes during week 24. Even after birth, newborn babies can only see to about 20 centimeters or 8 inches of distance. But they can form memories of melodies even before birth, for example. A newborn has some interesting reflexes that disappear as they grow a bit. These reflexes are clearly related to our evolutionary history and survival. For example, if you stroke the cheek of a newborn, it will instinctively turn its head to the side that was touched. They also have a sucking reflex because mother's milk is their only sustenance at first. This reflex disappears by 5 months of age. Also, babies younger than about 6 months of age have a grasping reflex, also known as the palmar grasp, so that they will hold on to anything that touches their palm. They have this reflex before they can intentionally open and close their fists. This seems to have its origin in our evolutionary past, when our ancestors still had fur that a baby could hang on to while the adult was climbing, the way other primate children do. There is also a strange reflex named after pediatrician Ernst Morrow in 1918. The Morrow reflex makes the baby spread its limbs when falling, then pulling them back. After this, they usually start crying. While it's not clear to me why we have this reflex, it does have a medical use now. It can be used to test if the baby was born prematurely. This is possible because the reflex develops late in gestation, after week 28. So, if the baby doesn't have it, it means the baby was premature. That presumably calls for special care. Babies have other reflexes too, but it is important to understand that other than those for coughing, sneezing and gagging, reflexes disappear by the baby's first birthday. This is probably due to the fact that humans, unlike many other animals, rely much more on learning skills and using them intentionally than just following their instincts. This is not a choice, but how the brains develop. The senses of newborns are not fully developed, but babies have some remarkable abilities. They have a preference for faces, which is probably related to the pareidolia phenomenon that can be observed in people of any age. They also prefer stories their mother read to them while pregnant, and can recognize their mother's smell. For the whole first year, the baby uses its mouth to examine everything, feeling and tasting things as they explore. The taste of the mother's milk is affected by what she eats, and infants learn to prefer the kinds of flavors they become familiar with through their mother's milk. There are some philosophically interesting experiments involving babies. In one of them, by Karen Wynne, 5-month-old babies were shown a theater play. In the play, a doll is having trouble opening the lid of a box, but one of 2 bunnies that are present helps the doll. After the play, the bunnies are offered to the baby, who can grab one of them. More than 75% of the babies chose the bunny that had helped the doll. In a follow-up experiment, 2 dolls are playing with a ball, and then one of the dolls takes the ball and leaves, when the expectation was to throw the ball back to the other doll. Then there's a second act, during which the mean doll tries to open a box, like in the first experiment. And one of the 2 bunnies that are present helps the doll. Afterwards, the babies are offered a choice of the bunnies, and now they usually choose the one that did not help the mean doll. These experiments seem to show a natural, innate sense of justice. Other animals also display a sense of justice, or morality. It follows that morality is not something handed down to humans from on high, nor is it something we can only discover through philosophical ethics either. It is fundamental to our nature as a species of social animals, because moral or pro-social behavior is advantageous, on average, to the spreading of our genes. This goes against social and political philosophies based on individuality and selfishness. Unfortunately, our nature as social animals is also displayed in another experiment where the baby is allowed to choose between eating cookies or cereal. They are then shown stuffed animals making the same choice. The babies then get to choose which stuffed animal they prefer, and the choice is usually the one that chose the same food the babies chose themselves. This seems to mean that the babies interpret that specific stuffed animal to belong in the same in-group with them. The unfortunate part comes next. The babies are shown a stuffed elephant making a different choice, making them members of the out group. In the next phase, the elephant then struggles opening a box, and one of two bunnies helps the elephant, while the other tries to prevent it from opening the box. At the end, the baby can choose between the bunnies, and they tend to pick the one that was actually mean to the elephant. This shows the evil side of being social animals. Some people who are supposed to be adults still seem to be supporting evil people in politics, just because they happen to be, in some sense, members of their in-group. I would argue that such people have failed to mature into proper humans, still remaining merely social animals, incapable of practicing philosophical ethics. Babies learn especially by interacting with their parents. An important thing to learn is focusing attention, so that the parent and the child focus their attention on the same thing, using multiple senses. Playing with children is important, not just to teach them useful skills, but also to build a connection or bond between the child and the parent. The parent can help the baby to learn how to control their body by gently using the baby's hands to clap and then letting them try it on their own, as well as placing the baby in different positions so that they can experience how it feels to be upright, on their belly or on their back, for example. I have even shown a baby an example of how to turn from my back to my belly, although I'm not sure that helped a lot. Babies develop cognitively very rapidly, but it is possible that they also have some innate concepts they don't even need to learn. Piaget thought that only around 8 months old babies would understand that objects don't cease to exist when not being observed, but experiments have shown that even babies as young as 2 months old show surprise when objects are made to disappear in such conditions. It is thus possible that object permanence is actually an innate concept. Similarly, the number or quantity of things may be innately understood. In one experiment, babies were shown a box with a doll in it. Then another doll was added into the box. The babies were then shown that there are actually 3 dolls in the box, which seemed to cause surprise. The babies seem to have had some understanding of the difference between 2 and 3 dolls. This kind of innate concept is philosophically very interesting, going very much against the empiricist tradition of epistemology, according to which we learn such things only through experience. Babies learn the social smile already between 4 and 8 weeks after birth. Before that, their smiles are not really communication, but after this point, they can use smiling to entice the adults to pay them positive attention. At around 7 months, a baby becomes shy around strangers, unlike before that age. This passes during the 2nd year. Babies learn a lot by observing their parents, including how to react on an emotional level in new situations. One weird type of experiment is called the still phase. In this experiment, an adult first interacts with the baby normally, but then suddenly stops reacting at all. They just stare blankly at the baby, showing no emotion or reaction for 3 minutes. The baby usually becomes anxious and tries to restart the connection by making noises and moving. Because the weird stillness lasts so long, some babies give up and instead try to avoid the weird gaze. There are, of course, differences between babies in how they react to situations based on their temperament. That is the biological basis on which they develop their personalities as they grow a bit older. Temperaments are innate and consistent reactions and types of behavior, including how rhythmic their eating and sleeping cycles are, how happy they seem to be, how easily distracted, and so on. Temperament does not mean how emotional the baby is, and there are no objectively good or bad temperaments. How well the baby, with their unique temperament, fits in the environment it finds itself in is what matters. The parents may consider a type of baby more or less difficult, for example, and that sort of distinction has also been used in psychological research. But the point is that this reflects on the relationship, not the baby alone. There are big differences in the speed of development between infants, so that one could learn to walk at 7 months while another at 18. This is normal and does not reflect the future development of the child. When they begin to walk on their own, they are usually referred to as toddlers because of the manner in which they move. The baby phase can still be considered to continue usually to the 3rd year after the child learns to express themselves and their thoughts verbally, and to think and solve problems much better than previously. They will then play in more complex ways and display a much improved fertile imagination. These cognitive changes are considered so significant that the person can now be called a proper child, no longer a baby. Childhood will be discussed in the next video. See you then, and bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.